Welcome to Perspective in Practice. I'm your host, Rachel Saathoff, and today we have with us financial and risk management expert Gwen Muse-Evans. How are you, Gwen?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Gwen, can we start out with you sharing just a bit about your personal journey?
Well, I'll kind of give you the 30-second bio and then I'll kind of go a little deeper. But I am an entrepreneur now, and I am the president and CEO of GME Enterprises, which is a consulting and advisory firm that's been in place 10 years. And we work predominantly in financial services, but what we do is help organizations reach their strategic goals by mitigating risks. And so how I got started is just, from very humble beginnings. I'm from a 10-person family, and
Wow.
my dad was in the military. And so there was never very much money around. Now that I understand more about economics and about, folks that are really impoverished, I think that we were probably lower middle class, but definitely a situation where it was a very male dominated household. And, my dad, he was in the military, plus always worked multiple jobs because he had a big family to support. And so for me, growing up, I just kind of watched both the gender roles, kind of seeing the male dominated household with dad working and mom being a stay-at-home mom for the most part. Then also, as I kind of looked around, just I was always fascinated with different jobs and just, different roles that I thought made more money. I didn't know a lot then, but also just what thought was more, important roles. And so I started actually working when I was in high school and did some of the standard jobs, fast food restaurants and, kind of entry level jobs. And same thing, just really always carefully watched and looked to see kind of how do people make it, and how do people advance. And
Yeah.
so when I went to college, I actually started working in a bank.
Okay.
And so that was really my first toe into financial services. And I worked as a teller, but I became fascinated with and of course the management team were, mostly white males at the top levels, and then you saw some middle management women. But I saw this woman who fascinated me because she could seem to come and go as she pleased, and she was super confident and wore really cool business clothes, and she had an office, which was a big deal. And cherry on top, she was a Black woman.
Okay.
And so I just kind of approached her and asked her to just tell me more about what she does and explain more about what her background was. And really, I would say she was my unofficial first mentor
Yeah.
before I even understood what mentorship was.
Yeah.
And that really piqued my interest in, credit
Yeah.
and, banking and mortgages and lending. And that's really what I'd say where I started in terms
Yeah,
of my
I feel
interest.
like that's like a great example of how mentorship and seeing somebody else do it can really like impact
Yeah.
other people moving forward. Like it kind of raises that bar for everyone else. Did
Yep.
you ever feel when you were kind of back in the teller beginning stages, because historically tellers have been women, back in the day banks closed at 2. So did you ever feel like intimidated moving into a predominantly male industry, like especially as you kind of come up in leadership, especially as a woman of color?
So I'd say, of course, at the time I didn't realize it, but I really was raised with quite a bit of confidence in myself. And so I do think that it was kind of intimidating, right? Because you don't really see people like yourself. And because because I was the first that graduated from college in my family, so we didn't really have that track record. And so I didn't understand how it all worked.
Yeah.
And so there was really a lot of learning, a lot of searching, a lot of inquiry.
Yeah.
And yes, at times, I think as women, it could be easy to kind of get frustrated by the roadblocks, right, and the glass ceiling. And so I do think there's no doubt I faced that at times, but I really, kind of was able to push myself to I can be frustrated and I can be down for a minute, but then just, shake yourself off and get moving, And so for the most part, and I was pretty good at, not being discouraged and still, reaching for the next opportunities, even though, there was the reality of bias and racism and, just cronyism, you
Yeah.
name it, it exists. It really does in financial services. But, as we see more and more women and women of color being successful, we know it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. In your experience, what leadership skills do you feel are lacking most in the financial industry?
So I'd say that in definitely financial industry and financial services, because we're so focused on the bottom line, right? And many people, particularly in the senior levels, it's really about the quantitative success. I would say, like over the past few years, you're hearing a whole lot more about the emotional intelligence, which kind of wasn't a thing before, but I get it, and it's real, and so I'd say that kind of the emotional IQ of being able to connect with your team, connect with the community, and connect with the clients that you serve is something that's lacking. And it really became, super clear to me as the chief risk officer at Fannie Mae, where I was responsible for facing off with the community advocates who were saying, yeah, yeah, Fannie Mae, you're supposedly doing something so great, but this is the reality of how some of your policies are impacting communities. And during the Great Recession, where you had millions of folks who were losing their homes daily, kind of being the one that had to respond to some of those complaints where it's real people, so we're looking at, for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they've got books that are trillions of dollars. And so you get disconnected from the humans. And I
Yes.
think as a woman of color, in those, the senior levels, I think that made the difference for the organization to have somebody who could really hear, right? The just the pain and the challenges that were happening in the community to be able to impact national policy to make the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I definitely agree that, like, just bringing the human back into things is so important, and remembering that people aren't just the numbers on a page.
Right.
Like, these are
Right.
actual people impacting people, and like it's easy to get distracted from that when all you can see is kind of the facts and the figures. What would you say helped you like stay grounded, I guess? Or what advice would you have to give others to, remind themselves to stay grounded? Or what skills did you learn as a leader to help you kind of stay grounded?
So I think, and definitely, I'm going to say there were a lot of trial and error, and a lot of times when, I didn't make the right decision. But I think that ultimately, as I look back, being authentic, right, and really being true to yourself is important. And I'd say that, through my career, because I've worked for a number of Fortune 500, even Fortune 50 companies, and so you've heard diversity, equity, and inclusion for decades, right? But the reality is that even the companies that say that they, DEI is one of their cultural values, that I is the being inclusive is actually pretty elusive. And I would say, in my experience, particularly in financial services, that the reality is that sometimes there would even be people hired that look different, but in the end, they are very similar people.
Yes.
And we kind of talked about this tendency to focus on the quantitative, but not always be sensitive to the human aspect of what we do. But I'd also extend as a woman executive, so how men connect, is by golfing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to the bars, it's going to sporting events. And so for women, now I actually do like sporting events. I did pick up golf along the way. Not very consistent at it. I'm not great at hanging out at bars. I'm a woman of faith, and so like for me, my faith grounding is really important. And through the years, as I myself, and I've seen other women who try to assimilate, and they think that I need to be one of the boys to
Mhm.
get along and to get ahead. That's a mistake. And so that's one of my learnings, is because you actually could kind of maybe get opportunities because, some senior man thinks you're cool or thinks you're a good golfer or what have you, but you're not happy. Like ultimately, if you're not, congruent with who you really are, then as a person, you don't have satisfaction, you have frustration. And to be candid, I've actually seen many of my counterparts who end up with health issues,
Mhm.
real stress, that they're internalizing. And so I would say that, it's really important to try to find that, the way to be true to yourself, and try to find that way to connect with.
Mhm.
It is important to have mentors and sponsors, and the reality is because of the imbalance of women who look like me who are in these senior leadership roles, your mentors can and should be folks that don't look like you, and so I've had tremendous mentors. I've had some that look like me, and I've had many that don't, that really, once you kind of take the baggage off and don't create roadblocks for yourself, there's plenty that are out there,
Yes.
and so we kind of have to avoid getting in our head, and
Yeah.
starting to doubt ourselves and starting to make assumptions, because sometimes, and right now we're seeing this really heated environment, but sometimes I'm surprised when I look at the television and I see a person and I make assumptions of who I think they are, and
Mhm.
they're not, and so as we manage our careers, we really have to try to remove our own biases that
Yeah.
could potentially hold us back, and really leverage just being who we authentically are to build those relationships. And for me, I'm not hanging at the bars, but I actually love music and I'm a vocalist. And I
Yeah.
found many men in business, in financial services, who love music. And so that's one of the ways we've been able to connect, and men do, now it's more acceptable for them to talk about their children. Whereas before it kind of wasn't a thing, and so you can connect, about talking about your families and talking about the travel that you love. And so it doesn't have to be that you try to become this golfer or this hang out in bars. It's like who are you, and how can you connect to a person, kind of from a point of authenticity.
Yeah, I love that you say that because it just makes me think of John Maxwell's quote, everyone communicates, few connect. And I think even just, with the stereotype of, promotions happen after hour, you got to learn how to golf kind of thing. There's so many men out there that are just the same as you that they're like, I'm not a golfer, but I guess I'm
Right.
going to learn. I don't
Right.
play tennis, but I guess I'm going to learn.
Mhm.
I'm not really interested in this country club, but I guess I'm going to join, and so I think men fall into that stereotype just as much, but really just trying to figure out your way to connect.
That's right.
I think for myself, when I meet new people, I just try to keep asking questions until I can find something that we can relate on, even if it's not through me, even if it's like, oh, I have a friend or I have a family member that does that too, or likes that too, or is interested in that too. And that kind of creates that bond and rapport, that
Right.
relationship that can then lead to less awkward conversations and more like sincere, natural conversations than let's just go to a cigar bar or let's go to a whiskey bar, or let's go golfing type thing. Finding that different way to connect, I think, is such a good advice to give people that are, wanting to either move up from where they are or just are in emerging leaders roles of just like, how can I be seen by the people of influence, and finding that those different ways to connect.
I think I kind of a couple of thoughts to what you just said. So, we're having a conversation about, this industry and how women of color can advance. But The thing that, well, it definitely is important for us to identify mentors, identify sponsors, build those relationships where we potentially may be able to become aware of an opportunity that we might not have otherwise. But I think that we also need to look for ways that we can be a resource,
Mhm.
and so some of my strongest connections are the ones where I've exactly what you said. As we've met, I'm listening, and listening to kind of what's important to them, what's happening in their life, what stage of life are they in, and so that's where often the family conversations come in. And then, everybody kind of has this network that's their, professional and personal. And then there's the opportunity to say, I read this book, or, I am aware of this podcast that might be interesting to your daughter. And and so kind of there's twofold. There's we really always have resources that could benefit others, even more senior people. So it's not only about us looking for who can help us get to the next level, but also, I find that when I'm in situations where I'm the mentor or I'm providing presentations in a community, you never know who's watching. And
Yeah.
so sometimes those opportunities where you're just giving, which I think is our responsibility, right? And you never know who's there and who sees you, and it just creates exposure opportunities because you're showing up as a leader
Yeah.
without expecting anything in return.
Yeah. 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 It sounds like you, as a leader, very much value like authentic leadership, servant leadership, and then, just kind of giving before receiving, which
Absolutely.
is so, so important. I'm curious, like in industry, when you've been working with businesses or clients or even just colleagues, like how have you seen leadership skills intersect with like the finance or health of an industry or of a business, like, and their ability to take risk or not take risk, or just how have you seen leadership impact some of the companies that you've worked with?
So I love that question. And, we've seen it all, right? And so we see the organizations that have strong leadership, and strong leadership are focused on, setting goals. They're focused on, kind of having a strategic plan that they're willing to communicate to the entire organization. They're focused on building, empowered teams,
Mhm.
and real and not holding all the cards to themselves. And then and it's interesting because we're dealing with two organizations right now. They're at two opposite ends of the spectrum. And so I kind of described the one, great at strategic planning, great at, communication, great at team building the teams and empowering people. The other end of the spectrum is not not very active in strategic planning,
Mm.
uh, did not want to even update delegations of authority because they, kind of were like, well, I'm not sure I'm comfortable providing this authority to the team.
Mhm.
Um, Having very bad communication, but in this case, like having meetings where information is censored.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, is this like really 2024? And, kind of the results of that, because we're talking about, the leadership, and then what are the results of all of that? When we actually look at the organizational success metrics, of which one is, how well do you retain your people?
Mhm.
You're seeing, one organization that has very low turnover, the other organization that has very high attrition, and it's really difficult to keep the people. And so, kind of those leaders who are focused on the health of the organization and really building the bench strength, right? And building somebody to replace them, building, like we look at succession planning, and those who actually have succession plans versus those who don't. We're like, well, everybody's kind of good at their job. And so it's there are very clear indicators, when you've got a strong leadership team versus one that's not. The other thing we do is we'll do a SWOT analysis, so the analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what we do is actually ask the leadership team to do that SWOT analysis. Now, going into those exercises, we already have an opinion, right,
Yep.
of what we think are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so it's really an opportunity for the leadership team to reflect, but it kind of is very revealing, right, of kind of how self-aware the team is.
Yeah.
And so, it's like for a strong organization, we walk away from those exercises and can glean some really good additional information, even beyond what we've identified. For those who are not self-aware or who are just don't have as strong a leadership team, sometimes it's that like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like you really think you have no weaknesses,
Yeah.
which we actually have had that as a situation. And we, kind of just from being just kind of that, like our goal is to make organizations stronger and better. Like we do share that information. We share where we feel as though there's real gaps and real indications of an organization not being self-aware. We kind of sit down with the leadership team and have that conversation.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're literally going through that exercise right now. Another thing that we do through this, just to belabor the point, in this case, like literally real situation is we do surveys,
Mhm.
and so we'll facilitate third-party surveys of the management team and the employee base. And then it's just kind of like it's anonymous, come one, come all, obviously we're the ones who are receiving the content, but then we're kind of scrubbing it for any information that might point to the fact that Rachel's the one that said this bad thing, and then share it with the leadership team. And so the leadership teams, and in this case, you know, organization A, very good. There's always some constructive feedback. Organization B, really inflammatory feedback that was trending from multiple sources. Organization A is looking at it as an opportunity for improvement and how do we take this and make ourselves better. Organization B is like, I disagree with this. And
Yeah.
we're like, well, it's like, this is from your staff,
Yeah.
like what is there to disagree with? Like, this
Yeah.
is how they feel, and then and they really are trying to, like, this is part of like an official report that needs to be filed and they really want to censor it. And so it's very telling, as you pull the thread all the way from, the conversations with the leadership team and their practices to ultimately, how is their team feeling about everything?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so crucial for organizations to make sure that they're doing those SWOT analysis, but also doing 360 assessments to just make sure, like, what is the health of the organization? What's the health of your leadership or your management team? I know that recently I did a SWOT analysis and it was funny because I did really good and I felt like I was doing really good until I got to the T. And then I was like, oh yeah, this. And I think one of the hardest parts for leaders is sometimes to reflect on those
Mm.
threats. Like,
Yep.
because especially as a younger leader like myself, you kind of just think your health is on your side, you're invisible, like you can just kind of do whatever you're going to do, but it's a really important thing to be thinking about.
Yep.
um especially like myself, like I consider myself kind of a transformational big picture thinker. So like the SWO are usually things that naturally come intuitive to me, but the T, I'm like, I don't really want to think about that.
Right. Right.
So, but it's really important to have that outside perspective from a company like yourself, to be able to come in and do those analysis and give people, leaders and executive teams that feedback because it's accountability. When have you seen impact of a company when they haven't been paying attention to that intersection?
So We've seen that, so the example I just gave you is kind of some of our government clients in financial services. And so like if you think about the, evolution of our economy and mortgage banking, is kind of a great example. We've the interest rates, if for those of you who are homeowners, interest rates have been like awesome and historically low for, a decade, if not a little bit longer, but now they're higher, right? And what that means for our clients is that the refinance volume of business has dried up.
Yeah.
And so it's really purchase money mortgages or people buying their homes is the heaviest volume.
Mm.
However, we've got an issue in this country with the supply of housing,
Yeah.
with affordable housing,
Yeah.
with first-time home buyers being able to even be able to get into a home. And so how it plays out for many of our clients is that their volume of business has shrunk drastically.
Hmm.
And so, we, having worked with many of these companies since like 2016, have been having the conversations with them about, kind of what is your strategic outlook? What are your goals? What are your plans, in terms of ways that you're going to adjust based on what the market is doing? How are you going to improve, gain operational efficiencies? And, do you have the right staffing? And so really looking at the full people, process, technologies. Those who have been receptive to, okay, well, yeah, we get it. We need to be vigilant. We need to be forward thinking. We need to consider what the emerging risks are. We need to make sure we've got the right team in
Hmm.
place. We need to invest in technology. Those are the ones who kind of today are surviving.
Yeah.
We've had a number of clients who had to close their doors,
Yeah.
and who are still struggling. They've had massive layoffs. And so it's really like, and that's an industry, kind of the mortgage banking industry where it's really hit home, and it's completely evident when you um, haven't seen the types of investments, the type of strategic planning, the type of just building the organization that's needed for
Hmm.
them to have a sustainable, healthy, strong organization. And
Hmm.
so we, and it's just like I have the benefit of having been at this for over 3 decades, right? And so I've lived through multiple cycles,
Hmm.
and kind of so I can read the tea leaves a little bit and say, okay, so when we've had this before, in terms of all of the, economy, the market, the interest rates, all these factors that work together,
Yeah.
when we've had this perfect storm in the past, um, organizations have needed to certainly tighten the belt, but they've needed to invest in technology while the volume is really high, while the revenue is high, while the profitability is high, so that when you have the leaner years, you're able to survive.
Yeah.
And again, so those that kind of heed that and really make those wise strategic decisions make it, and are successful, and those that do not, kind of struggle.
Yeah. I think it's such a leaders forget to think about the lows when they're riding the high.
Right. That's
They're
it.
like, "This is amazing. It's gonna be like this forever. Everybody loves me." And then, like, in a night, COVID happens, and the whole world shuts down, and everybody's like, "Wait, what?"
Right.
You know,
Right.
and those threats, no matter what it is, like, completely out of your control. It has nothing to do with you. Making sure that you're pre-planning for those when life's going your way is so important because yeah, I know people as well that are in the mortgage industry and were loving life and then mortgage interest rates went up and now they're out of business
Yeah.
and it's crazy. I'm like, oh my gosh, you've spent an entire lifetime in this field and now it's not going so well.
And
So
I want to kind of tie that to, and this is jumping way ahead, but I want to make sure I say this, and so when I'm invited to do interviews like this, I'm a financial literacy coach.
okay.
And so I talk about financial empowerment and financial literacy, and everything that we do. And I kind of like going back to our, our women leadership and women trying to advance in, male dominated industries and women in financial services. And I would say that we too, need to make sure that we're exercising very prudent financial management principles. And so, they almost that same tale of two cities that I just described in terms of the organizations that make the right investments and those that don't, and plan for the future and those that don't. The same goes for us, right, as women. And so it's really important that we, you know, while we're advancing, still be careful, in terms of managing our finances and be careful not to completely live, up to our means,
Yeah.
because I've seen a number who, kind of we're earning more than we've ever earned before. So let's go get the biggest house we can possibly get. And
Yeah.
let's get the most expensive car that we can get. And I love wearing fancy designer clothes and shoes and so, really kind of allow like spending money, without really thinking about the future. And I would say that, like having good principles and habits around budgeting and planning are really important, even when it seems like you're making more money than you've ever made before.
Yeah.
And then I would also say that having a nest egg is really what provides the flexibility to take risks with your career.
Yeah.
And in order to, sometimes, we've had situations where we, feel like we're doing everything right in an organization and we're, hit a glass ceiling. So we're still not getting that promotion or getting and I had a situation where I, kind of did all the right things and kept getting promoted. But then when I got to the highest level, it took me longer than my counterparts to actually get that title, the SVP title. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, what happened? Like why am I still a VP instead of an SVP when others who have done what I've done, served their time, etc., you know, got it faster.
Yeah.
And this was definitely, in my opinion, kind of was a bit of the bias thing, a woman, man, maybe a woman of color, I don't know. But at the end of the day, when you reach those situations, then sometimes you have to vote with your feet.
Yeah.
And that means that sometimes it's, okay, I've achieved everything I can achieve here. Let me, pursue something bigger or brighter elsewhere, but it's hard to take those risks if, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And again, people can make a whole lot of money and still be living paycheck to paycheck.
Hmm.
If I, kind of have these debts that I'm tied to and I can't move. So I'd say that, just kind of having prudent financial management kind of will help us to be able to manage our careers and manage our businesses, because then, when the cycle hits or something happens, we do have a nest egg to fall back on.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad is a CPA, and I remember at a young age, he always told me, just because people have a lot of things doesn't mean they have a lot of money.
Hmm.
And he's like, the shoe will always drop.
Yep.
So always, be conscientious, keep your expenses low, be frugal. Like my dad's also the guy that he doesn't buy anything unless it's on sale. Like he'll buy 5 t-shirts that are $5. It's on sale. It's a good deal. He doesn't always need them, but he'll need them in the future. He's that guy. But always kind of ingrained that into me of, be conscientious of that. And I think also, as women leaders, sometimes we fall into the stereotype of we don't always know or take care of our finances the way that we should, because the messaging that we may have received, you know, as a young kid of like, you're a girl, you don't need to understand math. You're a girl, you don't need to understand finances. Like, oh, somebody will take care of this CFO stuff for you for your business. Don't worry about that type thing. I think and then you wake up one day and you're a leader and you think you're doing really great, and the next thing you know, something happens and the money's gone. Like, I think that, having financial literacy classes like yours, is super important. And
Yes.
also understanding different principles of leadership and being able to apply them is super important as well. So what would you say would be the best piece of advice you would give to somebody about leadership? Or what was the best piece of advice you've ever been given about leadership?
So that's a great question, and it's hard for me to narrow it down to one.
Okay.
But I do think that really as a leader, being focused on building the best team and the most resilient team that you can is a piece of advice. And it kind of, some play it out like, like be the be the dumbest person in the room, or hire people who are smarter than you. But I think it's more than that, because it's really kind of having the diversity of skills, of certainly capabilities. In my case, one of the things that I'm working on is kind of building kind of a multi-generational organization, because as a baby boomer, my tendency is to kind of pull more baby boomers around me.
Mhm.
And the reality is that there is quite a bit of us kind of being in a trench in terms of how we think and how we work. And so I have, as we've been working to kind of expand our generations, I it's been eye-opening for me as a leader, to have a stronger team, because there's really different opinions and different approaches. So that's been good. I think leading by example is another, for me, which is really about rolling up, being willing to roll up my sleeves and being willing to show my team that, hey, guess what, guys, I'm willing to work just as hard as you. So
Yeah.
don't think I'm like in the ivory tower saying, go forth and do these things, you plebes, so I do think that those are two pieces of advice. And then the third it is from one of my white men mentors, who
Okay.
happened to mentor me while I was a chief risk officer at Fannie Mae, and he was a mentor as I launched GME Enterprises. And one of the pieces of advice he said to me, who I'm an introvert, was, if you let them forget you, they will.
Mm.
And when he said that, I'm like, and then he explained, and this person, I used to call him the curmudgeon, because he's seemed like this grumpy, unapproachable man. But I just really respected his just capabilities and his thinking. And so I kind of had started talking to him, and then it just grew into a great relationship, and a mentoring relationship. And he was really like, you need to push yourself, and you need to get out there, and you need to introduce yourself to people. And like, I had this one very senior executive who had said to me, hey, whenever you're in town, make sure you stop by. So I did the thing where I doubted myself, and I'm like, he's too busy. He
Yeah.
didn't really mean that. He was just being nice. And so I'm walking on the campus, of Fannie Mae one day, and I see him while I wasn't in town all the time. And he's like, hey, good to see you. Didn't I tell you to stop by whenever you're in town? Like, oh, so that was the worst, So definitely if you let them forget you, they will. And this transcends to everything. And it
Yes.
transcends even now as an entrepreneur, where you run into people at conferences, and you say, oh, I'm going to follow up. And then here it is, 2 years later, and oh man, I never followed up. And people definitely do business with folks they know, like, and trust, but they got to get to know you. And so you got to show up, and you got to, just follow through and follow up. And so that was a piece of advice that I felt just covered so much ground, in terms of not kind of falling into my comfort zone, and not going into my laboratory, as I like to call it, where I'm just kind of heads down doing stuff, but kind of come out,
Yeah.
interact with people, reach out to people, be a resource to people,
Yeah.
and just be memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody just said, I just heard the quote the other day, 90% of life is showing up. And I was like, oh. I actually just posted that on LinkedIn this morning
Oh,
because
awesome.
it's such an impactful thing is, it's showing up. Like people are always like, oh, I don't want to go to that networking event, or oh, I don't want to have this networking meeting or follow-up conversation or whatnot. And I've always found that when I have that like feeling like I don't want to do it, that's when I go to the meeting
Mm,
or go to the event and like leave there like feeling like I'm so glad that I went to
right,
that. Like,
right,
and so now I like almost catch myself when I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. And then I'm like, no, that means that you need to do
right,
that even more.
right.
So that's awesome. That's awesome.
Rachel,
Yes.
we're almost at time. So I just want to throw one question out at you. What is one piece of advice that you, representing Break the Norm leadership, would have to companies who may be watching, who are looking to help combat some of these challenges for women of color that Gwen has mentioned?
Yeah, honestly, I would say a couple things. Like break the norm leadership, I would say like a couple things. I would say executive coaching for sure would be something that helps combat some of these things because I think tailoring it to your specific challenges and your specific experiences that you've had in life that are holding you back can really working through some of those challenges with an executive coach can really help you move the needle forward working to do that by just kind of focusing on yourself first. And then I would also say, doing mastermind groups. Like we love doing mastermind groups because it really encourages that like thought-provoking leadership, peer-to-peer leadership, people giving advice or opinions on things that you from a completely different perspective. And then being able to go try it come back to the group and kind of share your experience and then continuously learn and grow and build from that experience. I think it gives accountability in a different way and really can help leaders grow. Whether you're in that emerging leader stage where you're like, I'm just trying to figure out what this leadership thing is, or I'm in a manager role and I'm taking a mastermind group with a bunch of other people that are managers, or even like doing a CEO roundtable type thing, I think can really help. So awesome. Well, thank you, Gwen, so much for sharing your leadership insights. It's been a pleasure to hear
Likewise.
your experiences and the lessons you've learned along the way. And to all of our viewers, if you enjoyed hearing Gwen's insights today, don't miss out on other Break the Norm interviews. If you're an organization interested in learning more about Break the Norm leadership services or interested in learning about some of Gwen's services, please make sure and click the link below. Have a great day, everyone.